your time today. Senate Bill 1186, my name is Doug O'Conowitz. I'm from Legislative District 3, for the record. Senate Bill 1186 addresses campaign disclosures. And I want to start by asking something, a rhetorical question, is why do we report political contributions at all? You all do it, I do it, every official that runs for office has to do it. The reason for it is simple. It's so that people in the public and law enforcement can look at those contributions and make a value judgment as to whether or not they are influencing or overly influencing an official, an elected official's acts or votes. That's it. Simple as that. If it wasn't it, we wouldn't even be doing campaign contribution reporting at all. The whole purpose of that, the courts have talked about it in terms like that for a long time. They distill it down to a legal phrase of quid pro quo corruption. You'll see that in McCutcheon, which says that Congress and legislatures are limited in limiting political speech only when it addresses quid pro quo corruption in fact, or quid pro quo, or the appearance of quid pro quo corruption. Those are justifiable purposes, reasons behind legislation that impacts spending and reporting. Now, Senate Bill 1168 does not impact spending. It does not impact aggregate totals as we had in McCutcheon v. FEC. It does not try to eliminate a class of contributors, so certain types of people, excluding them from being able to contribute. 1168 simply asks that large contributors in election spending be disclosed, or that money can't be spent on an election in Idaho. So currently, we have a certain situation where a PAC or a nonprofit, for example, that are this PAC, for example, being a non-FEC reporting PAC, which there's a lot of those, they raise money. You could have a large dollar donor contribute $10,000, $100,000, millions of dollars to that entity. In turn, that entity can contribute unlimited funds to an in-state PAC. Now, it doesn't have to be one that resides in Idaho, but it's one, when I say in-state, I mean one that's going to be spending in Idaho. So the spending PAC has to report. When they report, all they have to do is list the PAC or the nonprofit that they received the money from, not the $1 million contributor who made the original contribution. So that entity remains anonymous. So I ask you at that point, how do the voters make a value judgment? How can they determine whether or not that person who made this huge contribution has ties to the individual that it benefited? They can't. It's impossible. So the simple question for us is whether or not anonymity for wealthy political spenders is more important than the public's ability to evaluate potential corruption. That's the question. You have the First Amendment on the side of free speech and spending money pretty freely. And then you have the importance of elections. And the courts have wrestled with this with different types of things. In McCutcheon, they wanted to limit the aggregate amount someone could contribute. This doesn't do that. A wealthy individual can contribute as much as they like.
Anderson.
That doesn't change. But in order for the entity that's going to spend money on an election in our state to spend that money, to disclose all contributors of $1,000 or more, whether they got that $1,000 or more directly or they got it indirectly. Now, I had a question over the weekend from someone who was curious about the bill, and they were worried about a doxing sort of scenario where people maybe have contributed to a nonprofit and didn't, feel like they should have their names disclosed. Well, they don't have to. If that nonprofit makes a contribution to the spending entity in our state, and the spending entity says, hey, we have to file a report on all your contributors of $1,000 or more, will you please provide that to us? They can say, no, we're not doing it. All that does then is it makes the spending entity in our state unable to use that money in the Idaho election. And then it's between them and their contributor as to whether or not they return the money or they use it for other purposes. But they cannot use the money on an election. That's all it does. Nobody gets disclosed if they don't want to be disclosed. I think that's going to be it in a nutshell. I'm sure there's going to be quite a bit of testimony, and I have some other things to say at closing, Mr. Chairman, if that's allowable. And I'm happy to stand for questions.
I do have one quick one, Senator. The legislative intent is really negative, and it's really filled with indications that we're all bought and paid for. That's the way I'm
You are.
dirty even reading it.
You received $76,000 from what?
On line 33 on page 1, the common belief among the populace that many elected
Corporate
officials are
lobbies and
overly
PACs.
influenced, if not controlled, by
Mr.
wealth
Guthrie?
and special interest. And then on page 2,
Just take a look at
Line
the Sunshine
4.
Report from 2024.
talks about transparent
$64
campaign
million
finance reporting
goes
and
to
which contributes to the
1,447
majority of the public,
Republican,
contributes to the
mainly
majority of the public
incumbents.
believing corrupt practices are being employed and hidden. Is that data, are you able to back that data up from somewhere? Is there some kind of reliable source that indicates the public is that negative?
Mr. Chairman, absolutely. First, I'll say that the legislative intent was included primarily because the courts have determined that our legislation of this type has to be directed toward quid pro quo corruption or the appearance thereof. So that lays that groundwork. The direct answer to your question, there's a number of studies I found. You do one Google entry and you're going to be busy reading for a long time. But probably the one that seemed to be the most prolific and often cited was by Primo and Milio of 2020 out of the University of Chicago Press. They found in their study nationwide that roughly 80%, in some cases over 80% of the population believe that public offices are for sale and the campaign finance system is corrupt, is broken, corrupt. So that is a widespread belief amongst the public. The appearance is obviously negative. This bill will go a long way toward helping address the appearance of potential corruption because it will allow people to make value judgments on who's spending and how it impacts the actions of office holders and elected officials.
Bravo.
Do you feel like a study out of Chicago is relative to Idaho?
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman, absolutely. That study was a nationwide study. It wasn't limited to the state of Illinois. Obviously, studies of that type use lots of methodologies that ensure that they get decent results. As I said, it's one of the most often cited studies that I could find on this question. I found studies done by law schools and law professors and lots of other things. So this one was the easiest to digest. It's the most often cited, so that's why I bring it up.
Senator Taves?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Okonowitz. I'm interested in, it seems like this is covering a lot more than just politically motivated donations. So, like, if you were to do a look back to PAC, so if it was like, if this PAC from out of state gave to a PAC in state, and we're going to look at the donors that gave to that PAC, that would make a lot of sense to me because the donors would know that they're giving to something political. In this case, with it covering nonprofits of all different sorts, I think a lot of their donors don't even necessarily know that their giving could be going towards something like this, and disclosing them is somewhat problematic. So I'm wondering why you're covering all those bases instead of just politically motivated spending or contributions.
Senator O'Conowitz.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Taves, as I said earlier, just to begin with, if a nonprofit contributes to a PAC that in turn contributes to another PAC that's doing political activity. Now, nonprofits are not supposed to spend money on political activity or they lose their nonprofit status, but so they say they still somehow felt it was worthwhile to contribute to a PAC that does other things as well or whatever, and it was allowable. Now that PAC contributes to the one that's going to spend and has to do the reporting in Idaho. That PAC can only request the information from the one they received it from. I suppose they could call the nonprofit as well if they wanted. They're not under any obligation to provide that information. They don't have to disclose their donors. Frankly, it's probably likely that their donors didn't anticipate their contribution was going to be used for political purposes down the road. So they're still protected. There's no requirement for them to disclose. They can just say no. The state of Idaho can't require them to disclose under this legislation. It merely says in that event, if they decline to disclose, that the spending committee cannot use that money on an election in our state.
Senator Adams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator O'Conowitz. So a lot of nonprofits, 501c3s, also have 501c4s that have a PAC, and oftentimes their donors are the same people. Do you think the implementation of this would
Adams grew
make
up
it
in the
more
Soviet
difficult
Union as
for
a boy.
the nonprofit portion to be able to
Receive food
raise
stamps.
money if donors who believe in this and also believe in this know that their information is no longer protected?
Senator O'Conowitz.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Adams, I suppose the simple answer to that is if you've got an entity, well, you basically have two legal entities. They're not supposed to be coordinating, but again, they'll have the same people on their boards and so forth. That can happen. To the extent that someone is employing a nonprofit in order to send the money to the nonprofit and then to the PAC just to remain anonymous, then if it's important to that person to remain anonymous in order to be active, then yeah, I suppose it might slow them down. But now we're back to the big question, which is what's more important? Somebody who wants to spend a ton of money on an election, spending that ton of money anonymously, or the public's right to know who's involved in influencing their elections? I suggest it's the latter, but that's why we're here to talk about.
Senator Shippey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator O'Conowitz. Good morning. I see here on page 11 the disclosure of payments made to signature gatherers. With this change in the law affect, let's say, a nonprofit pro-life organization to do what's within the legal scope of what they can do, whether it's either providing information about a ballot initiative, let's say to legalize abortion or something like that in a state or in the state of Idaho, would that affect?
Shippey talks like a lawyer.
Would they be required to report all their donors? Because I know they can do some work. Obviously, they can't advocate they can't lobby unlimitedly, but they can educate the public on certain issues. How would that affect a nonprofit organization here in Idaho directly?
Senator O'Conowitz.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Shippey, their nonprofits are limited in their what they can do politically. They can educate, but they are not allowed, while retaining their nonprofit status, they are not allowed to advocate. So
Except
I would say
501c4.
that you're working on a ballot measure, you're working in advocacy. You're advocating for something. If you're out gathering signatures and trying to qualify a question for the ballot, I suspect that nonprofits are not allowed to fund that directly.
That's true with 501c3s.
You're dealing with a PAC, I think, in virtually all those circumstances, unless it's a volunteer group, and even they might have to work under a PAC, depending on how the laws are in that state. So I think it's similar to Senator Adams' question about, the two entities that, people who run them know each other, or maybe it may even be the same people, but they're supposed to be separate entities in order to abide by the law. So I don't know that people contributing to, and frankly, if somebody contributes to a nonprofit thinking that they're doing it for educational purposes, or the money's going to be used for educational purposes or other traditional nonprofit functions, and then that nonprofit turns around and puts that money toward political functions, I'm not sure they'd be terribly pleased about that. So they have every ability to contribute directly to the entity that's gathering signatures. Hopefully that answers your question.
Let's go to some testimony. I don't see any other questions. Heather Andrews. Welcome to committee. Just introduce yourself and who you represent for the record.
Yes, sir. Good morning, Chair Guthrie, members of the committee. My name's Heather Andrews, and I represent Americans for Prosperity, Idaho. At Americans for Prosperity,
That's
we
the
advocate for a civil
Koch
society
brothers, or
in which
Charles
state
Koch.
laws foster, not hinder
Alec
broad
organization.
participation in the pursuit of sound public policy. This legislation
They
has
write,
the unintended
200
consequence of stifling
they write
issue
bills
advocacy under the
at their
guise of
annual Alec
campaign
convention.
finance transparency,
And then bring them
disproportionately
back to Idaho.
affecting
About
smaller
200 bills.
organizations
That's why
and
there's so many
charitable
bills
groups.
in Idaho.
Rather than enhancing voter awareness,
1,455,
it risks
is it?
spreading misinformation about the entities participating in Idaho elections. Additionally, it threatens charitable giving and non-political contributions by exposing donors to unnecessary disclosure risks.
Because
Ultimately, this measure would
there's,
shift influence toward institutions that traditionally
Idaho
lean
Republican
left, such as
legislators
national
that go back
mainstream
to the
media,
ALEC
further distorting the
conventions.
political landscape.
and then
Due
they
to
bring
these
these 200 bills
extensive
back, cut and
restrictions
paste. A
on
lot of
speech,
them are
this legislation is constitutionally
anti-abortion,
suspect, and if enacted, could expose Idaho to
demonizing the transgenders,
costly legal challenges,
doing away
potentially
with
burdening taxpayers
Medicaid
with
expansion
hundreds of
or any
thousands of
medical
dollars
care.
in legal fees.
Want everything to be
This
privatized.
bill also misinforms, not informs the public.
Well,
For
anyway.
this reason, it will increase the appearance of corruption in Idaho elections. Consider this scenario. Two Idahoans, Doug, a registered Republican, and Joe, a registered Democrat, each contribute $1,000 to a charity that supports small businesses. That charity in turn donates $2,000 to become a member of a small business advocacy group. Later, a ballot measure is introduced that proposes raising local taxes to fund infrastructure projects aimed at attracting businesses. The small business advocacy group
Go out
opposes
to
the measure and donates to
Google
the No on One campaign,
American
while the
Legislative
small
Exchange
business
Council
charity supports it and donates to
source,
Yes on One.
Idaho,
However,
and you'll
Donald and
see
Joe's personal
the,
views on the measure remain
Idaho
unknown.
Republican
Under 1186,
legislators
despite
or
having no
members,
direct involvement in the ballot
like
measure
Becky,
campaign,
for
both Donald and
example,
Joe would be publicly
of
listed as donors
Alec.
on both sides, each attributed with giving
That's-
$2,000, when in reality they each only donated
source,
$1,000 to a
Alec,
charity. This misleading
Idaho.
outcome distorts the truth, misrepresents donors' intentions, and undermines confidence in the disclosure process. For these reasons, we urge you to vote no on 1186. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Heather Lauer. Welcome to committee. Your name and who you represent.
Thank you, Chairman and members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today. I'm Heather Lauer, CEO of People United for Privacy Foundation, and I strongly oppose S1186, a deeply flawed bill that threatens the free speech and privacy of Idahoans. I also speak to you as a citizen of Idaho and chair of the Republican Central Committee in Blaine County, a
Okay.
place where being a conservative often means being a
You-
target.
You've never.
The day after the 2024 election,
attended, are you
a local Republican
I don't
activist
think you
found
even know
feces
about
on her
ALEC,
lawn
the
next to
American
her No on
Legislative
Prop 1
Exchange
sign,
Council.
an act
The other
clearly
thing,
meant to
Google,
intimidate.
Bill
Side note,
Moyers.
vandalism and verbal harassment at rallies are
World
now
of
expected
Alec
in
or
Blaine
something
County
like that.
if you are a conservative.
And-
These stories
and,
are from
it's
people
an
brave
excellent
enough to be
video that
public
will
about their
explain
beliefs.
what Alec
Many
is.
others simply stay
And
silent.
they bring all these
One
bills
local
in and
realtor
these
told me
crazy
he
bills.
won't donate to political
Of
causes,
course, Idaho
not
is
because
very,
he doesn't
very,
care, but because he
liberal
fears the
when it comes
backlash,
to
if
the number
exposed,
of
would
bills
destroy his
versus,
business. Sadly,
600
he's not alone.
in Utah,
While the
and their
potential for exposure might
legislative
silence
session
conservative
ends
voices in a place
on,
like Blaine County,
February
I imagine
15th.
Democrat donors feel the
And
same
here we are
concerns in other parts
on
of
March
Idaho.
31st.
Despite those concerns, my
about,
organization is not
87
opposed
days?
to the disclosure of directed donations
And,
for political
and
purposes. But that's not what 1186
1,455
does.
bills? Come on.
It forces disclosure of donors to nonprofits that advocate on issues.
Yes.
The disclosure of trace donations under the scheme would create a significant chilling effect. Everyday Idahoans could be publicly tied to political
A rich
messages
guy
they
can
never
get money
intended
to
to
a
support.
PAC.
That
Say,
would
for
result
example,
in a cascading deterrent
Guthrie,
effect
his
among
dad
would-be
says,
donors,
hey, I got $1 million and
impacting
I
a
want to
wide
help him
range
get
of
elected.
advocacy groups in
You give
Idaho.
it to a PAC.
We've already
and
seen the
then he
consequences in
disappears,
Arizona.
And the PAC
A
donates all
similar
that
law
money.
scared conservative donors into
Well,
silence
Guthrie
during an
can't take
abortion
but
ballot
2,000,
initiative in
but the governor
2024.
can take, what is it,
Publicly,
10,000?
we know the pro-abortion side outspent the pro-life side 35-1.
Yeah.
Privately, we've been told that donors
Well,
either
that's-
reduced or withheld
I
funding
wouldn't
in the
believe a
fight
thing you say,
because they
lady.
didn't want to cause harm to their family or livelihood. Whatever your politics, there is nothing American about using fear to drive constituents out of the public space. I urge you to stand up for free speech and oppose 1186. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. I don't see any questions. Ron Nate,
Oh, Ron Nate. Ooh, here is the Idaho.
welcome to the committee. Introduce yourself. Who do
Freedom.
you represent?
Is the Idaho Freedom Foundation or the Idaho Freedom Caucus?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Ron Nate, president of the Idaho Freedom Foundation, here to oppose Senate Bill 1186.
Okay.
This bill would obliterate donor privacy in Idaho for all donations over $1,000 that are even tangentially related to political speech.
Tangentially?
The bill would disproportionately benefit progressive organizations while punishing conservative ones. We live in a cancel culture where conservative individuals, people, businesses, and political groups are mostly
It's
targeted
not
for their
conservative.
political
The only thing
beliefs
I
or
found that is
activities.
conservative
Just
about
this
a
weekend, we saw
conservative
multiple
is
protests,
to
vandalism,
conserve
and
the
even
rich
violence
man's
perpetuated
money.
against one car company
I'm on a
because of
roll.
the political activities and proclivities of its CEO. We have seen many such incidences
Yeah,
of people
Vandersloot,
and
for
groups being
example,
targeted for their speech on all
he
sides of
runs
issues.
Melaleuca, the
Because of the
MLM up
extensive
there in
reach
Idaho
of this
Falls.
bill, many organizations
spends
and politically
millions.
active groups will
In fact,
find it
Rubio
difficult to
came
raise money
to
because of
Idaho
the new
Falls
law
a few years ago.
will
I
have a
attended
chilling
that
effect
meeting
on
to get his
speech
$1 million
because donors
check.
will believe, and rightly so, that
So,
they may
you
be
know,
targeted
by the
for
way,
giving to causes they believe in.
A rich guy or a
Whether
billionaire
or not
that
the bill
dabbles in
actually
politics
impacts
is
those
called an
organizations
oligarch.
and donor requirements, in fact,
You
the
know,
mere
they
belief
use
that
their
it
money
does
to
will inhibit
influence
speech.
laws.
There is a
Or
distinction
another
between
word for law is
transparency
policy.
and privacy. Transparency is what citizens demand of their government.
Yeah.
Citizens'
Yeah, Ryan.
privacy is what government is charged with protecting.
The Idaho
Laws
Freedom
working too broadly and too
Foundation,
aggressively
and
to
that
target speech,
organization is
some people
funded
don't like.
by
Through
Charles
over-disclosure
Koch.
will threaten the privacy,
just like a
freedom
lot
of
of
speech,
other
and political outcomes.
organizations. Here
If this
again,
bill has the impacts the sponsor
Google,
hopes for, the indirect outcomes will be
Bill
tragic.
Moyers,
Many donors to causes they believe
Alec,
in may,
and watch the
because of
video.
their fear of disclosure and
And
retaliation,
he does a great
choose to
job
contribute less
explaining
or not
who
at all.
Alec is
This will
and
mean
why we
the
have such
well-funded
a
super
long
PACs
session
with fewer,
that costs
larger
$70,000
donors,
a day
billionaires who can afford
to
to
keep
protect themselves
the
will
Idaho
be the only ones
session
standing.
going.
It will have the opposite
Compare that
effect
to the
than those
45
intended by the
days of
sponsor.
Utah.
This means that wealthy candidates who can self-fund will have a better chance against their opponents who may have to rely on lots of contributors and dare I
come
say,
on, you
even
know better
PACs.
than
Do
that,
we
Dave.
really want our campaigns dominated by overfunded super
Yeah,
PACs? and wealthy self-funding
1,447
candidates?
Republicans received
This is a bad
$64
bill,
million
perhaps the worst
from
of the session. But then again, there's the Medicaid spending bill out there.
corporate
Thank
lobbies
you for your
and PACs.
testimony. Don't see any
And
questions.
Mr. Guthrie gets a lot of that money.
Megan Schmidt, try her virtually.
And Moyle, you know, he gets $100,000 a year. Nobody runs against him. He's been there 28 years. And that buys advertisements, yard signs, and mailings, especially the mailings, the $5 mailings that go out. You know, I had one that was NRA, Sheriff's Association, Fireman Association, And the governor said vote for the incumbent Cheetah.
Good morning. Can you hear
That
us?
card cost $5 and it came from a pack.
Yes, just introduce yourself and who you represent for the record. Welcome to committee.
Great. Senator Guthrie, members of the committee, my name is Megan Schmidt, and I'm the Senior Director of Government Affairs at Philanthropy Roundtable, and I'm testifying in opposition to Senate Bill 1186. The Roundtable is a community of donors who are committed to advancing liberty, opportunity, and personal responsibility through effective charitable giving, and we represent private community and family foundations here in Idaho. This bill is unconstitutional and goes against America's founding principles. Idaho is home to over 10,000 nonprofit organizations, and approximately 8,400 of them are 501c3s. This legislation is an overreach and would cause considerable harm to those charities.
Well,
We support the right of Idahoans to give and associate privately, and believe donor privacy must robustly be protected. Unfortunately, Senate Bill 1186 mandates that nonprofit organizations divulge the personal information of some of their donors to the government if these organizations engage in issue advocacy. This directly undermines longstanding safeguards for donor confidentiality established by federal law and decisions of the U.S. Supreme Court. The bill enforces a new requirement on nonprofit organizations that spend over $1,000 within a specific time frame in support of or in opposition to a candidate or ballot measure to disclose their donors. The worst part is it doesn't just stop with the nonprofit's donors. It calls for tracing donors back to the original nonprofit organization. Senate Bill 1186 would quickly become an administrative nightmare for nonprofits to comply with. Senate Bill 1186 disregards fundamental safeguards for freedom of speech by establishing a so-called public entitlement to encroachment upon an individual's personal matters. It coerces donors into a dilemma: either stand by the causes and groups they endorse or expose their contributions and private details to the government. This outcome is poised to curtail open expression, intensify unwarranted intimidation, and foster a more contentious political dialogue. The goal of the bill may be to enhance transparency in campaign finance and instill public trust. However, in the legislature's attempt to stop any appearance of low pro corruption, it risks alienating nonprofits and donors alike. Philanthropy Roundtable encourages the committee to vote do not pass on Senate Bill 1186. Thank you, Senator Guthrie, and members of the committee, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for your testimony this morning. I don't see any questions. Appreciate it. Christian Welp.
Line them all up, against them. That's why you have it in your committee. So
Please introduce yourself and who you represent for the record. Welcome.
Good morning. My name is Christian Welp. I represent the Catholic Church in the state of Idaho.
Mr. Guthrie.
Chairman Guthrie, members of this committee, thank you for the time this morning. I agree with what has been said already. Nothing new to say there. But the one concern that I do have that hasn't been mentioned is the ballot initiative piece on page 11. We've got a ballot initiative coming up in regards to our pro-life laws, and there is going to be quite a fight that comes in the next 2 years. And for the Catholic Church and many other pro-life organizations, and I do see this bill, the language, I do see this bill holding back people wanting to donate, being afraid of donating for this cause because of this reporting language. And with that, I ask you to vote no against 1186. I stand for questions.
Thank you for your testimony. I don't see any questions.
Well, be
Senator
anonymous,
Rucky does have one.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Welp, I always get 501c3s and 501c4s mixed up, what they can and cannot do. Are you able to help me with that if I ask you a question?
Mr. Welp. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Senator Rutke. There are probably others that can answer that far better than I can. I get them confused myself. Thank you.
Thank you. Edward Clark.
501c3
Is your name and who you
cannot
represent.
contribute to political campaigns. 501c4
Mr.
can.
Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Edward Clark, and I serve as Policy Assistant at Idaho Family Policy Center.
Okay.
We are here in opposition of Senate Bill 1186 for
Don't want to
a few
disclose
primary
that money,
reasons. First, as Mr. Welp was just stating, we are concerned about the chilling effect that this would have on contributions to really
from
important
Vandersloot
political issues
and,
such as
Charles
upcoming
Koch.
ballot initiatives. A great example of how similar campaign finance laws can affect ballot
else?
initiatives is found in the state of Arizona. Arizona. In the year 2022, Arizona passed a similar campaign finance law that had really wide-reaching implications.
Contributes $1
And then in
billion
2024, there was an
to
important
various
abortion-related ballot
organizations to
initiative
influence policy
on the ballot.
or laws.
And those in favor of the initiative were able to outraise
he only contributes
conservative
$100
pro-life
million.
groups 30 to 1.
There's a
in
big
large
difference
part
between $1 billion
due to the
and
increased
$100 million.
campaign finance requirements in Arizona. And with the upcoming ballot initiatives in the state of Idaho, our organization is concerned that this legislation would prevent pro-life organizations from being able to raise money and adequately combat efforts to repeal our abortion laws. The second primary reason we stand in opposition of this bill is because of the far-reaching and unintended effects. The provisions of
far-reaching
Senate Bill
unintended effects
1186
will
would create a daisy chain effect
we might be
whereby
able to
organizations and charitable
repeal
foundations
Citizens
may be required to
United.
disclose lists of all
But,
their large money
basically,
donors,
is
regardless of
corporations
whether the
lobbying
donations were
billionaires
made
with
for
dark
campaign
money
purposes.
is buying
For example,
our
Organization A
electors.
donates $2,000 to Organization B,
and
and
buying our
Organization B
government.
in turn donates $1,500 to Organization C, and then Organization C gets involved in campaign finance in various aspects.
Baloney.
Then Organization A would be required to disclose
the money
the list
is
of
the
all of
reason
its
why
money donors,
we've had dominance
regardless
and
of
we don't
whether
have
or
a
not those
balance in
donations
the
were
Idaho
made
government
with
anymore.
political
I ought to
intentions.
know.
Now, the senator
How do you
who's
get
brought this
money?
bill said that will only
Well,
apply
listen, I
if
wrote all the,
individuals who are making those
the
contributions
packs, but they
consent to
never
their
sent me
information
any money.
being
They
made
sent it all
public.
with Jeffrey.
However, that guarantee is nowhere in the language of the bill. It's up to the organization's discretion whether or not they release the list of their donors' information. And for these reasons, we stand in opposition to this bill.
Thank you for your testimony. I don't see any questions. Doug Taylor? Welcome to committee. Your name and who you represent.
Good morning, Chairman Guthrie, members of committee. My name is Doug Taylor. I'm testifying on behalf of my client, FGA Action. FGA Action is a nonprofit, nonpartisan advocacy organization that seeks to improve the lives of individuals by advocating for public policies focused on free enterprise, individual liberty, and limited accountable government. I'm here today to encourage you to oppose Senate Bill.
Oh yeah, you would. You got a green badge, don't you, there, buddy?
Describe the
You're a
relationship
lobbyist.
government is supposed to have with its
Same
citizens.
thing.
It's not supposed to be the other
We
way around.
like money.
Voters expect transparency from
Especially
government.
money from Charles
That privacy is reserved for private citizens.
Coe.
Every American
Again,
has the right to support
Google
causes they believe in and to be free
lawyers.
from fear and retribution.
Alec.
Picking and choosing who has
The
to
world of
publicly
Alec
report
or
their
something
names
like
and
that.
addresses when they make a donation
The other
is
one is,
antithetical to the American tradition.
The American legislative, the Koch brothers
chilling effect
exposed.
on free
Koch
speech.
brothers
And for those that
exposed.
continue to
Right,
engage in the process,
You'll
they will
learn
have to
something
fear
there
if their
about
information will be
Charles
collected
Koch.
and used against them for supporting or
Privatize everything, and it's pretty
Government
much in
should protect
alignment
everyone's
with
individual privacy.
the
Private expression of free speech
John
is a
Birch
long-standing
Society.
tradition started by the founding fathers and
who
protected by the
believes in
Constitution.
privatizing
For
everything.
those reasons, we ask that you oppose Senate Bill 1186. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. I don't see any questions. I don't have anyone else signed up. Is there someone else who would like to speak to this that was not successful signing up? Come on up. Just to introduce yourself for the record and who you represent.
For the record, John Hughes here today on behalf of the Idaho State AFL-CIO. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Committee, for the time today. I want to start out by saying that we support the concept within this bill. We ourselves do not peddle in dark money. We do not support dark money, and we've seen politics become increasingly monetized. That's really concerning. So we support the concept behind this, but I have a few concerns. I'm going to echo some previous comments about the chilling effect that this could have on in-state donations. If we chill those in-state donations, it only tips the balance of power to out-of-state money, in my opinion. And there's very few things in this bill that are going to stop someone from just outright breaking this law. There's a $53 a day non-compliance fee. The candidate wouldn't be, or PAC would not be allowed to spend that money. But there's, these are relatively small things, and I fear that what we could see is that out-of-state groups will just say, I'll take that $53 a day. That's nothing compared to the hundreds of thousands that we're spending on these independent expenditures. And so I just fear that this bill will tip the balance of power from in-state groups, chill in-state donations.
Take a look.
and,
John
favor
Deere
out-of-state money.
donates money to
Thank you for your
the
testimony. I don't see any
Republicans.
questions.
Brought
Mr.
to
Claiborne.
Idaho Secretary of State Sunshine Report, and you'll see the $64 million that is donated to
Welcome, committee. Just
1,447
introduce yourself. Who you
Republican,
represent.
mainly
Thank you, Mr.
incumbent
Chairman.
candidates.
David Claiborne. I'm here representing the Idaho Dairy Industry PAC. Just one item, not knowing where you might be going with this bill, but Section 8 of the bill find problematic. It would require, if your donor is a corporation, to disclose all their officers, directors, and 10% or more shareholders. That's problematic for us. A lot of our donors are agribusiness corporations. They're family owned. A lot of times for estate plan
Farm
purposes, even their minor children are members of those corporations.
Which
And
is
we just find that problematic that we would have
PAC.
to be
They get
identifying
$215,000
all
to
these
64
shareholders of these
Republicans,
corporations that might be
incumbents.
minor children or just family members that are part of
They're in Pocatello.
the family farm corporation. And for those reasons, we're opposed to Senate Bill 1186. Thank you.
And I'm willing to bet that you know the answer to Senator Rucky's question on C3 and C4.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know that I could answer it very well. A C3, from my understanding, is not supposed to engage in political activity. There's C4s, C7s, and others
Yeah, C4
that are
can.
allowed to engage in political activity. That's just my high-level knowledge of it. Beyond that, I don't know that I can speak.
Sorry for putting you on the spot.
Yeah, you know it,
Senator Burr, you look like you were going for your mic.
Why did you ask him the question when you knew the answer?
Okay, thank you.
I thought that was
Is
a
there anyone
no-no.
else that didn't get signed up that would like to speak to this? Did you have a question?
Not a question, but I know someone in the audience that may know a little bit about C3s and C4s, and he's the good Secretary of the State of Idaho. Mr. Phil, would you want to come up and talk about that?
Would you yield?
Sure, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Phil McGrain, Secretary of State. And I don't know if this helps to your question, Senator Recchi. I'll start by just framing that Idaho's sunshine laws are agnostic to the nonprofit status or for-profit status of any organization engaged in it. So the IRS does have different thresholds in terms of, so even C3s are eligible to participate, but only moderately. Like it goes in degrees based on the status. I would encourage talking to a nonprofit organization lawyer regarding that in terms of it.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Rucki.
If I could just ask a question, if you don't know, we need to find somebody who does nonprofit work, then we can do that. But the question would be this: can a 501c3 participate in electoral advocacy regarding levies, bonds, and initiatives?
Secretary McGrain.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Recchi, I can tell you're looking at your computer. In terms of us, it doesn't matter what the organization type is. So in terms of a contribution, it has to be reported through. So if any of the organizations, whether it's a lawful transaction under the IRS is a different question. But for us, as long as it's reported, here's the organization, here's their address and contact information, that money could be used, as long as it meets the sunshine laws.
Okay, I was, I guess, referring to what the federal laws said or did not say about activities of C3s or C4s, but maybe Secretary McGrain isn't able to answer that. But I do have one follow-up for him.
Follow-up.
Mr. Chairman, Secretary McGrain, can you comment on the enforceability of this law, like the practical aspects of being the Secretary of State's office and having to enforce the provisions of this law?
Secretary McGrain.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rucki, I appreciate the question. I will say, as a matter of perspective, I haven't followed this nearly as closely. Senator O'Conowitz has met with our office, so I definitely want to recognize that. As you are all aware, because I testified earlier, there are other campaign finance bills, much more comprehensive, that have been discussed specifically on the House side. So that's a lot of where my focus has been. And I will add, because this has actually been really informative just to hear the discussion today regarding this piece, I personally think that there are other steps that we need to take in terms of transparency first. I think the intention, and I think Senator Conowitz has framed it, is just to be able to follow the money. I always personally struggle with the term dark money because most of what people refer to as dark money is actually very well reported and you can find it. You just have to go take advantage of the resources that are available to look at it, like our site. I hear lots of descriptions of
but the
things
dark
that
money
lobbying
comes
or
from
campaign finance
Russia
that is actually already
or
publicly
a
reported.
foreign government.
The challenge, I will
they can say who they are.
you making a little bit of a pitch for House Bill
where's that cash come
399
Follow
is
the money.
so this talks about the layers of donations, but right now under our current statutes, because of the time frames that we have in place, you can go if right at the end of the session here someone makes a donation and this were to pass, they would still have over 9 months before they were even obligated to report anything. And so there are some bigger holes in our current structure in terms of reporting and transparency that are relatively minor fixes in terms of the frequency of reporting, and one of the challenges making it accessible. I know, speaking with the pro tem, we had the 398 just up a little bit ago. Part of it was just adding the disclaimer so when someone gets something, they know who's behind it. That's I think that's an intentional first step to get there. So again, as we've been following it through this session, we haven't been as focused here as on the other ones because there are some smaller gains that could go a long way in terms of overall public transparency that I think have broader support as well.
I hope you're not starting to regret yielding to a question. Senator Ruckey?
Just one last question, Mr. Chairman and Secretary. Would you anticipate, given your knowledge of campaign finance law, that this would spark a constitutional challenge, a lawsuit against Secretary of State's office for trying to enforce this statute?
Secretary McGrain.
Mr. Chairman, you're trying to tie all the bills together today. Thankfully, the Secretary of State's office falls within the Constitutional Defense Fund. Based on today's testimony, I think there could be. Campaign finance is already fraught for litigation, especially because you heard the testimony, the First Amendment. You heard it from Senator Conowitz. I mean, the legislative intent is his anticipation that this could have legal challenges, and so I'm a very strong advocate for the First Amendment. One of the biggest challenges we face in all of this as a regulator is people wanting. Generally, we hear from people wanting to stop speech they don't like. That's not what this is about. Everyone in this process, our founding fathers fought hard to say bad things about King George, and so I want to protect that. And so it is always a balance of adding transparency without trying to have a chilling effect on speech.
Senator Taves.
Very good.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Secretary McGrain. I'm really focused on the PAC to PAC, and like you said, we can pretty easily find out who donated to the PAC that has some political activity in a campaign or a ballot measure. If I see that a PAC within Idaho gave to that PAC, I can pretty quickly find out who their donors are as well. That's pretty easy. As soon as we go outside of Idaho, it gets a little bit more difficult for me. Is it possible to know who the donors are in PACs that give to PACs in Idaho?
John Deere is not in Idaho.
Who are outside of Idaho, I guess super PACs.
Just look at the bottom of those postcards that come in saying, vote for the other guy.
In our elections.
You need to.
Secretary McGrain.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Taves, first I'm going to start off, and I'll take the first part of your statement as a compliment, just because our site, we really try to focus on being able to follow the funding. I think you've touched on that, and I think it's a very well-informed question because it is more difficult the further as you get outside of the state. The last legislative session, we passed a bill to include FEC organizations. There had previously been an exemption for Federal Election Commission groups, and so we were in the process of improving that, I guess is the best way to say it. We issued guidance before the last primary that when donations come from an FEC registered PAC, they must list their FEC ID number to help with that daisy chain that you were just informing so that you can go see the list of donors. Again, in House Bill 399 and the subsequent RSs, we have efforts to tighten that up even further. And specifically, one of the things we're seeking in that legislation is to require any outside organization, and again, it's agnostic to the the type of organization, but that is going to participate and act as a PAC in Idaho, that they must register as a PAC in Idaho. So just bringing them straight into our system to follow that easy trail that you just mentioned.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Secretary, for your patience answering some questions there. Senator Okonowitz, would you like to kind of wrap up?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess it's in somewhat reverse order. I want to address some of the things I heard. This bill actually is directed at bona fide dark money being money you can't see who the donor was. That's specifically what this bill is addressed toward. So, which I think is important distinction, because there's contributions that are hard to trace down, and then there are contributions that are impossible to trace down. This makes the impossible possible. It allows the public to see who made these contributions. One of the testifiers said that the legislation would be akin to picking and choosing winners and losers. We're doing that now. We're saying these people have to report and these people don't. We're picking and choosing winners right now. What this bill would do is say everybody's got to report. So I wanted to make that point. I've never said that an individual donor to a nonprofit has the ability to decline disclosure by their organization. That was not something I ever said or intimated. That organization does, and I think it's highly likely that an organization that is dependent upon donors would be very sensitive to their donors. So I think the net effect is the same. The individual donors' information at entities who are requested to disclose who their large donors were has every right and ability to decline. And all that will do is make the in-state spending entity unable to use that contribution toward an election effort. The constitutionality argument you heard, from me and from other folks, obviously these things are always batted around. Even in the literature in this field, you'll see that this is an area that is fluid. There's no hard stop. You're basically looking back to the most recent series of court rulings. And this was carefully crafted to avoid constitutional problems to the extent possible. Of course, it's likely to be litigated or looked at for litigation. That's why we have a page and a half of intent language in there to try and buttress the defense. And to make it extraordinarily clear that the purpose of the bill is to address quid pro quo corruption and the appearance thereof, which are allowable for legislative activity. The last thing I want to say is on the business. So I left a couple things in that I wanted to see what the testimony would be. This process is an amazing process. We learn a lot when we do it. I've told folks that, I decided I wanted to leave some things in order to see how they sort of shake out, because I knew I would learn some things. The heart of this bill is directed toward the PAC and nonprofit to PAC disclosure. The language that deals with the businesses, I just wanted to see how that would fly. I'm not really wedded to that. I think that is a difficult space to operate in, and there's a lot of moving parts. So I'm certainly open to just wholesale removing those changes. Similarly, it's a section that deals with initiatives and ballot measures, basically, or signature gathering. That was really kind of a feeler as well. I think that if we're being completely honest about things, the legal arguments against that provision are stronger than they are the rest, because a ballot measure can't give you something in return for you supporting it. So it's hard to argue a quid pro quo relationship could exist there. So it's likely something that I think probably would be the most likely. If it was something that was going to die in court, that would be probably something that would not survive. So I'm also willing to take that out. I want to leave those in to see what people thought of it all, how it all worked, because they do all participate. So I think it's an important conversation. At the end of the day, we're back to the basic question. You have competing elements of the Constitution, and you have to decide, is anonymity for wealthy election spenders more important than the public's right to know who's spending the money? That's it. It's as simple as that. We work a lot to have people disclose when we're spending on everything else, but we're leaving this part out. So we just need to decide where we're at on that. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm perfectly comfortable going to the 14th for cleanup if that's the will of the committee.
I do have one quick question. I probably should ask the secretary, but I noticed the fiscal note indicates no impact. Did you consult with the secretary's office, and is that a fair reflection of that fiscal note?
I visited with them a number of times. I think the fiscal note, I don't recall exact conversation about fiscal impact to them, but it strikes me that they are already doing regulatory work in this area, so it would fall under the existing umbrella, it strikes me. Receive a complaint, pursue it just like they do with anything else.
Okay. Senator Shippey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Okonowitz, I wondered if you maybe could talk about a little bit on page 9 on independent expenditures. It says each person, and then underlined new language, other than a candidate in an Idaho election. Maybe if you could explain how that language came about and why it's there, and then it's repeated again on the next page under 2. Maybe just touch on that, why that's important.
Senator Okonowitz.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Shippey, those have nothing to do with the initiative. I know you just used it probably as a way to find it. So that has nothing to do with the initiative portion. What they're basically addressing is that candidates already have to report all contributions up to 1,000. The driver behind this bill is contributions above 1,000. So it basically excludes you from having to report in a similar fashion, just because you're basically not. You'll never get a contribution over $1,000.
Senator Adams.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. Senator Okonowitz, on that note, I guess I have a question in the same vein. So, and I understand it's not about initiatives. We're talking about the independent expenditures. So that's where I would independently give an expenditure. So it says each person other than a candidate in an Idaho election. So a hypothetical situation, I'm a candidate in an election, but I don't use my campaign fund to donate to another candidate or donate against another candidate or something like that. Am I now exempt from reporting?
Senator Okonowitz.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Adams, no. And I have used, for example, my campaign fund to do a independent expenditure on Prop 1 last year, for example, and I reported it. So there are opportunities where you could be spending the money that you report as a candidate on functions like that. That said, what I mentioned earlier was that I'm looking at moving out all the language that deals with initiatives, referenda, and signature gathering.
Okay. Senator Adams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Actually, check that, Mr. Chairman, Senator Adams. That part probably doesn't come out. That part, I don't want to misspeak. Because that could still persist. If we find ourselves wanting to spend money on an independent expenditure, we don't have to go through everybody who's ever contributed to you and ask them to disclose all their contributions. And the reason that you're treated differently is because you have to report all of those anyway. Everything you're doing is already transparent.
Senator Adams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, I think I'm having a language question here because it says each person, and also on page 10, each person when it's talking about reporting, and then it says other than a candidate in an Idaho election. So my question is, if I'm a candidate in an Idaho election, but I'm not contributing as a candidate in an Idaho election, I'm contributing as me, but I'm also a candidate in an Idaho election, am I now exempt from that reporting as a person? Okay.
Senator Conowitz.
Mr. Chairman, Senators, the term person is a legal term that applies to businesses as well as people and every other thing. So I think that's why that term was used there. The short answer to your question is you don't have to file every person who contributed $1,000 or more to any PAC that you've received money from. This excludes you from that.
I don't see any other questions. Committee, Senate Bill 1186 is before us. Senator Den Hartog.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we hold Senate Bill 1186 in committee.
Motion by Senator Den Hartog, second by Senator
And
Adams,
she's been
that
there,
Senate
what,
Bill 1186
16
be held
years?
in committee. Discussion of the motion. Senator Den Hartog.
Just briefly, Mr. Chairman, I really appreciate the work that Senator Conowitz has done on this. I think there's quite a bit more to be done, and I'm not sure we have the time to do it with what's remaining in session.
And I would concur with that. I think the intent is certainly good. I think the collateral damage potential is maybe significant.
Yeah, you won't get all those checks from those.
Including maybe the free speech piece, and there is other legislation in play that may or may not get there that might address a lot of this as well. So with that, I don't see any other questions. Again, we do have a motion that Senate Bill 1186 be held in committee. Those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Nay. Senator Anthony will be recorded as voting no. That motion has carried.
Okay, I'd like to chime in on this, and I'll repeat. If you want to go out and see the money, the $64 million, in fact, $17 million funnels into the 105 legislative campaigns every two years. Go to Secretary of State, Idaho Secretary of State, Sunshine. There's two different reports, but the one that I look at that's is updated is the $64 million that was donated over the last election. And then you can go down and you can see where the money comes from. And it's been my experience looking at it. It's most of it does come to the Republican Party. It is from corporate lobbies and PACs. Whereas on the Democrat side and the independent side, usually it's from $100, $25, $75, donations. So you can actually look at that. The other thing is the Bill Moyers. He's on PBS, and Bill Moyers, the ALEC. The World of ALEC or something, ALEC. That's the American Legislative Exchange Council, which if you go out and Google that, ALEC source Idaho, you will see the list of former and current Republican members. There's no Democrats that go to these things. And then it's a bill writing thing. It's a corporate bill writing. So it's estimated over 200 bills brought back by the attendees from the Idaho legislature who cut and paste those bills as their own. The anti-transgender, the abortion, tax bills, and these sort of things. So anyway, that's my story, and I hope this helps you.